welcome to Chartists. I'm your origin gentleman, Case, saying... So, you remember how my 2014 worst video was basically just a joke that skipped over everything? Well, I actually got a respectable amount of hate mail for that, so I might do it again! Because, this is an important year for music. That being said, I feel like I owe somebody somewhere an apology for that minor bait and switch, but what do you say instead of us going back and redoing that list proper, we just discuss the hits of yesteryear? That's what I thought. So, take me back in time, random time MacGuffin. Yeah. Ew. Oh. Good choice. Yes, 1984. The year so nice and named after a George Orwell novel about an extremist totalitarian regime in a futuristic dystopia. Let's be clear here, that joke is old. I hear it to this day, so I can't imagine what kind of crushing repetition the average 1984 goer would have felt at the time hearing those references. But beyond Macintosh commercials and movie adaptations, I will say this. 1984 kicks ass. 1984 was one of the greatest years of entertainment in the last century. If you loved a movie, book, TV show, or song from the 80s, it probably popped up around 1984. And of course the Billboard year-end completely indicates that. True giants make their claim here. Prince, Bruce Springsteen, Van Halen, Michael Jackson, Madonna, Stevie Wonder, Elton John, Cyndi Lauper, and on and on and on. I could write dirty online fanfics about this year's music, I love it so much. But despite my fanboy obsession, even I have to admit, after hours and hours of nerding out, that no year is perfect. Every year has its bombs, and 1984 is no exception. So what do you say? How about we go wading through 1984's sewage pipe? Against all odds, let's jump at the chance to bust the ghost of 1984. Part 2. When Doves Cry. Let's count down the top 10 worst songs of 1984. Number 10. Now here's a trip down memory lane. This is Casey and the Sunshine Band, the lame white counterpart of Sly and the Family Stone. While critical consensus of them has continued to plummet like a rock, the public at the time of their peak made them one of the most unbeatable acts of the 1970s, with 5 #1 singles. Yes, the 70s was a good time to be a disco act. Then the 80s happened. And by 1984, the band that had once brought you this was bringing you this. This is Give It Up, a perfectly titled song if there ever was one. In fact, such a last gasp was Give It Up that old Casey was essentially forced to include on not 1, but 2 of his studio albums. Which is kind of amazing to me, because it's not like it would have been that hard to make a cheap clone of it. Yeah, Bob Dylan, eat your heart out. My problem with the song isn't that it's lazy as hell, or some guy doing what sounds like a bad Fine Young Cannibals impression. It's just how pushy and demanding Casey comes off as while he's singing it. Yeah, he is not serenading some chick at the club. He's desperately flattering some girl after being turned down by every other woman in the bar. And I gotta say, looking at this awkward, sweaty creeper, I understand where every last one of them is coming from. Lady, I don't care what situation you're in to make this offer seem even slightly tempting, you are not desperate enough to give it up to this man. I can't speak as to the inspiration for this song, but I'm assuming it has something to do with a lot of debt. It doesn't even look like Casey wants to be there. Yeah, look at that awkward eye shuffle. That's a wide-eyed look of prayer that to me says, please buy this record, guys, I'm out of coke. I mean rent money. Since Give It Up, Casey and the Sunshine Band have mostly kept to themselves, ignoring an occasional once-per-album decade release, and the world is better for it. Oh, and by the way, their last album was...
Sunshine Christmas, Sunshine Christmas, Sunshine Christmas on a sunshiny day.
Yeah. And you think you missed the 70s.
Do you know I want a baby? Come on, baby, I want your love.
Number 9. So have you ever heard of this one song, See You Again?
Been a long day without you, my friend, and I'll tell you all about it when I see you again.
Yeah, I'm not reviewing that. I'm never going to, because tribute songs are, like, really impossible to review, but, hey, I'm down with being contrite, so here's this as penance.
Think of Laura, but laugh, don't cry. I know she wanted that way. And when you
Think of Laura is actually the song I felt least comfortable with putting on this list, but,
friend of a friend till the end.
this is an honest list, and this song honestly sucks. Christopher Cross is a late 70s soft rocker who made meaningless light beach music too obvious to be used in cruise line ads. By the time he hit a sophomore slump, Christopher Cross decided to try his hand at deeper topics, much to his detriment. Enter Think of Laura, a stab at a tribute to an old fallen friend. But surprise! It turns out he should have stuck to sailing in New York City, because Think of Laura isn't just bad, it can't even eulogize properly. See, in contrast to something like Candle in the Wind, which can only be about Marilyn Monroe, Think of Laura is written vaguely enough that it could be about anyone, except for the fact that they have to be named Laura, because Laura. See You Again, for all of its flaws, at least understands that if you're going to be unspecific, go the whole 9 yards. The song may have a dedication, but it doesn't need to be about Paul Walker. Do you have a cousin or a grandparent who died recently? Well, here's See You Again. Think of Laura, however, needs to be about Laura. Not a Laura, just Laura. Oh no, my dog, Laura! Oh no, my ficus, Laura! Oh no, my dinner plate, Laura! In fact, the only reason anybody ever listened to the song was because they thought it was about Laura Weber from General Hospital. That's not a joke! These days, it's easy to take a look at Christopher Cross and sympathetically see him as an artist who made the unfortunate decision to jump on a bandwagon that aged about as well as a toothbrush mustache. But let's be clear here, he is not an unfairly forgotten music powerhouse. There is a reason he went from Oscar-winning Grammy darling to washed-up has-been a scant 5 years later, and it's not because he had a barely existent voice that he only used to make weepy ballads that could fittingly bore you to death. It's just that, well, Christopher Cross at his deepest was not something we could set sail on.
I know you want it that way. Hey, Laura.
Number 8. The year is 1984, and America is admitting that though it is happy that disco is dead, its people still want to dance! Enter the widespread craze of white people putting themselves in the hostage. It's now more famously known as... I don't know about you, but I had never heard of this thing before I started doing a lot of research. Why is that? Well, A, 1984 was already kind of breakdanced out with the hit movie, song, and soundtrack on the topic, on which breakdance doesn't appear because that would be way too obvious. Mostly, I think that the public was just kind of tired of seeing Irene Cara tread water. At this point in her career, basically all of her good songs were about dancing and performing. I guess what I'm saying here is that by this point, Irene Cara was too pigeonholed not to make this song, and it was just kind of getting sad. Of course, that's not to say that breakdance isn't awful. Yeah, what kind of beat is that? It's going Mach 3. You can't play this on 80s nights. A beat that's designed so that a dude can show off his painfully overly choreographed routine. Silly me, I always thought that dancing was a group activity. I mean, even Breakin's big song was about that, and that was a movie that was devoted entirely to dancing show-offs. Plus, despite sounding way more fake, it's about 10 times as serious, what with this cam-fistedly shoehorning guitar solo and demonic hellhound repeating the word dance for what feels like half the song. Thanks for reminding me to dance, dude. I was kind of lost there for a second. At least Give It Up had Casey and his backup dancers clumsily moving around to the song. The people in Breakdance's video can barely keep up with something I'm sure they've practiced on for weeks. Even the guy saying the word dance loses the beat. And as it turns out, breakdance was the final act for Kara, and while I would normally call that divine retribution, I can't honestly think of a career this song wouldn't have killed. Number 7. 1984 comes in the middle of the decade, which tends to be the best time for popular music in any decade, because a lot of the old shit from the previous 10 years has been swept away, and whatever the new era has come up with hasn't had time to devolve into teeth-grinding pablum yet. The 80s, however, went the extra mile. They didn't just get rid of old musical fads, they banned an entire genre.
To all the girls I've loved before, who've traveled in and out my door.
To All the Girls I Loved Before is the Julio Iglesias-Willie Nelson duet that the world was not even slightly waiting for. Simpering and slow, it is produced in such a way that emphasizes the gigantic clunk that occurs when their voices collide. God, if I were MTV, I'd ban this shit too. Of course, the big country hit that everyone remembers from this year is Silence in the Stream by country super duo Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton. Most people will tell you that that song is awful, but I tend to be more forgiving of it because I think that the two make it work. Yeah, it's kinda cheesy, but they're buddies, so they kinda make it work on that level. To All the Girls I Loved Before doesn't work nearly that well. There's just something about Willie Nelson's world-weary tone that does not mesh at all with Iglesias' ultra-smooth balladier voice. Of course, it doesn't help matters that the song they decided to cover was garbage. I've listened to a lot of versions of this thing, and I can tell you right now that even in its very best incarnations, To All the Girls I Loved Before is dull as hell. No, I'm not usually a fan of Albert Hammond's work when it's done well, but there's something about turning this into a duet that feels a bit off. And look, I'm not trying to make any gay jokes or anything here, but the video really isn't helping. So, Willie, where did you get that name? Shortly after this, country more or less went dormant for a good decade or so, and both men returned to their niche genres and never charted in the top 20 and the Hot 100 again. Thus is the power of one terrible song. Now we just have to hope that Enrique doesn't owe a favor to Jason Aldean or something and we're in the clear. Actually, strike that. Number 6. I really do try and avoid the dishonestly obvious choices for these lists. I do that for many reasons, but mainly I just think that going with what everybody hates because that'll get a lot of support is a cop-out only hacks will opt for, especially if you don't actually hate the song. If you ever stumble upon AOL's list of the worst songs ever, you will immediately understand me in ways I can never hope to explain. No, you aren't going to see stuff like Sunglasses at Night or Break My Stride on this list. There's a consolation prize here, Chicago. Chicago is a polarizing band in pop music. At one point, it was kind of acceptable, even cool, to like Chicago. And then you turn around and they became rock history's go-to example for the worst thing ever. The proto-Maroon 5, if you will. Most critics tend to complain about 80s Chicago, which they honestly kind of deserve, but my problem is that a lot of people tend to pick on You're the Inspiration, which... Come on. Look, I'm not going to say that song is great, but for Chicago, it's probably their best hit song of the decade. Now, you want a crappy soft rock Chicago song? You're talking Hard Habit to Break. Hard Habit comes off Chicago's 17th album, which was well past the point when they stopped giving a shit. This time would start as a bad experiment for frontman Peter Cetera, who at this point had been threatening to leave the band for the past 40 years, had morphed into the group's new musical direction. Their bad, boring, soulless new musical direction. Boy, do those lyrics belong in a different song. I'm not entirely sure when songwriters began latching onto the idea of equating love and addiction, so maybe this was written before it became the most cliche thing ever, but I do know that if you're going to write about that topic, the BPM should be higher than a single fraction. I mean, this thing doesn't even really have a chorus that you can mindlessly hum to yourself waiting to get off the elevator like other 80s Chicago garbage. In short, I have no idea what keeps even the most conservative geriatric listening to this song. And it's not as though they don't try and add energy to it, they just fail at it miserably. Though, granted, I'm not sure Timbaland could do much better. And then the song fades out, perhaps indicating that it will come back to finish the job one day. Although, now that I think about it, I can't think of a more appropriate way for a Chicago song to end than it being eaten by its own apathy, so my hat's off to you guys.